Good morning once again, my brothers and sisters. Here we are on a very special day. Today we begin the book of Numbers, the fourth book of the Bible. Well, there's a lot to learn in this book. We've seen God create the world in the book of Genesis. We've seen him make a covenant with Abraham. We've watched him promise that Abraham's descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky. And that he would inherit a promised land. We've watched the Israelites go into slavery in Egypt and God deliver them miraculously. We've seen God give his law on Mount Sinai as he delivers his people out of the slavery in Egypt. We've watched God lay down the law regarding the book of Leviticus and how the tabernacle and the tent of meeting were to be constructed and what procedures were to be maintained so that the holy God could exist or be with the unholy people, what they would have to do to honor him in a way that was acceptable to him. And as we begin the book of Numbers, we begin a journey into chronicling all the people, counting them, making sure there's organization as the 12 tribes are kept distinct. We're going to also watch them on the journey to the promised land. But when we start the book of Numbers today, I just want to take you back to a cycle that we talked about quite a while ago now. But if you recall, the people of Israel, they might start with obedience, and that's going to lead them to God's blessing. You remember Leviticus chapter 26, there's tremendous blessing in obeying God. All right, but then what happens? Sin comes into the camp. They start to disobey God. They start to ignore what he wants. That cycle leads them to punishment. They receive the consequence of their choices. Once they've suffered enough, they decide to repent, and what happens? God forgives, God restores, God continues to love them, guide them, provide for them, and then they start to obey again. This is the cycle. This is the cycle. And as they go through that cycle, I want to take you back to Leviticus 26 just for a minute and remind you of something that's critically important. God says this, I will do what? I will remember my covenant. We're about to watch the interplay between man's disobedience and God's faithfulness, man's inability, unwillingness to follow God in truth, and God's willingness to keep his promise even though he's dealing with sinful, rebellious people, even though he's willing to let them suffer the consequence of their choices. He is still going to get his promise fulfilled, right? He's going to remember his covenant with Jacob, with Isaac, with Abraham. I will remember the land. You get down to verse 44 in that chapter, God says, look, I will not reject them or abhor them so as to destroy them completely. In other words, my judgment on their disobedience is going to have a limit, breaking my covenant with them. Oh, there it is. I am not going to break my covenant. So even though they're going the wrong way and doing the wrong things I've strictly forbidden, I'm the Lord. I'm going to keep my promise despite their lack of obedience. Again in 45, but for their sake, I will remember the covenant with their ancestors whom I brought out of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God. I am the Lord. So here it is. Disobedient people, the covenant of God, both working together. Even though it seems like the people of Israel are in total disarray, things are in rebellion, and it looks like there's no way God's going to use these people. Nonetheless, God continues patiently, faithfully, lovingly, and sometimes with discipline, harsh discipline, to get his people where he wants them to be. So in the midst of this cycle that we just looked at, I want you to remember that God's covenant is in the middle of that cycle. He is going to fulfill his promise to Abraham. He will keep his covenant no matter how badly his people behave. So, on to the book of Numbers. There's the book's name in Hebrew for you scholars. For the rest of us, we need this. You say that by saying Bamidbar. What does the book of Numbers mean? It means in the wilderness. All right. Now, it's named Numbers. Why? Because there's a lot of numbering going on in terms of cataloging the people, who belongs to what tribe, how many are there, what are their names. We're going to get into that as we go through the book. But the thrust of the book comes in the Hebrew name. These people are in the wilderness. You remember, they've journeyed from Egypt down to Sinai. That was the book of Exodus. They've been now in Sinai for about a year. Moses has been receiving instruction from the Lord, which we would call the book of Leviticus, about the rules. They've built the tabernacle. They've built the tent of meeting. They've got their instructions. But now they should have basically a 2-week journey to go from here up to where modern-day Israel is, to the promised land. But unfortunately, their path is not a straight path. It takes 40 years to go what can be walked in 2 weeks. All right, so 40 years, 2 weeks, man, something really went wrong. Well, let's look at the basic outline of this book. Okay, they're starting in Mount Sinai in the area where you see the X. Chapters 1 through 10 will cover that. They're going to travel in chapters 10 to 12. They end up in a place called Paran, which is up here. It's a desert area, right? They end up going to Kadesh Barnea and then wandering through this area. They travel again in chapters 20 and 21, and they end up there at the top in Moab in chapters 22 to 36. So this is the journey God's people are going to go on. And just to give you a little bit of the organizational structure of how God's going to arrange them, the tabernacle is going to be in the center of the camp. Those L's stand for Levite encampments that are around the tent of meeting, around the tabernacle. And as God would have it, he structures his tribes to be on each side of the tabernacle. We'll see that played out. But notice, as we get there, you'll see that God's intention is to make sure his people understand that he is absolutely in the center of their lives, right? He is the core, the one that's leading them. Remember, this is not a democracy. This is not a monarchy. This isn't any form of earthly government as we would know it. This is called a theocracy because God is leading his people. He is the king. He is the one giving instruction. And when the fire or the cloud moves from the tabernacle's location, this camp picks everything up and follows. And there'll be a specific order in which they follow. We'll get to that as well. But just to help you get this in your mind a little bit, the first part of the book is when Israel leaves Sinai. Then they'll camp at Kadesh Barnea for a while. You'll see a big rebellion happen that God responds to through judgment and helping people understand. But probably one of the key aspects of this book happens in chapter 13. Israel sends spies into the promised land. 10 of the spies come back and report that it's just impossible. We can't take these people. There's no way we should try to enter the promised land because we're just going to be defeated. There's no way we have the power to overcome these places. In other words, there's no trust in God. There's no confidence in his promise or his plan. Even though, historically they've watched all this deliverance happen to them, they still can't believe that God will take them forward as he has promised to do. Caleb, Joshua, they believe. The other 10, no, we're not doing it. So Israel decides not to trust God, and they decide not to enter the promised land. And that leads them to 40 years of wandering. This is such a key aspect to this book because we see two things. One, God accomplishes his purpose. Two, God will let you suffer the consequence of your choice while he accomplishes his purpose. They could have just gone in, but no, they decided they didn't believe God enough. They wouldn't trust him enough to just enter in. Okay, so God says, no problem. You can die in the desert. You guys wander for 40 years. Go ahead. If you don't want to go in, then that's your choice, and here's your consequence. It's very insightful in terms of how God deals with us even today. As the book moves forward, Moses strikes the rock at Meribah in his anger. That's going to also preclude him from entering the promised land. Edom, a nation, refuses passage to Israel. Aaron dies, and when we get to the end of the book, they're camping on the plains of Moab, preparing to enter the promised land. Probably one of the key verses in this book is here. In Numbers 23, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? This is a key verse. Why? Because God is always doing what God says he will do. He never violates his covenant. He never fails to keep his promise. In the end, it's great news for us. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We can trust him in this verse just like they did when this verse was written, when they lived through it. We know when he promises, it's a guarantee. But what's fascinating about the book of Numbers is the interplay we'll witness between God's promise and the rebellion of the people who refuse to trust God. I'm not going to belabor it this morning. That's enough. We'll begin the book of Numbers officially tomorrow to try to understand in chapter 1 how God has his people organized. Just remember, to make a wrong choice in God's economy might mean that God lets you go in the wrong direction. And there might be consequences associated with that. And what happens? God's still going to accomplish his purpose. And once we suffer enough, we usually come back. But in the end, God is going to move forward with our cooperation or without. What do we want to do? We want to abide. We want to be connected to the vine as a branch that produces fruit through the power of the vine. That's the only way that we can accomplish what God wants in our lives. God bless you, church. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible God, and he's the brightness of his glory, the first, the last, the future, the past. He is God.